Okay. Uh,
Hi, Fiona. So nice to see you. We just hopped on this call.
oh yeah, it's so great to see you. So tell me a little bit about your area of concentration.
I am doing a concentration in social studies. Some of the tools that are distinctive to my discipline are a lot of like historical like things like you could use like artifacts, like a lot of uh, first-hand accounts, like a lot of primary sources, uh, as well as secondary sources. But you don't really find primary sources anywhere but social studies. So that's pretty key. There's also like a lot of open discussion, which isn't really super distinctive to social studies, but um, there's a lot of room for interpretation of historical events, which is similar really only to ELA. So I would consider it kind of distinctive.
How would you assist students in doing a close reading in that discipline?
Uh, well, it's gonna have to start with like the type of source. Like if I'm looking at a secondary source or a primary source, and that alone uh, will like tell a lot to the students. Like this is the perspective it's coming from. Like this is its degree of reliability. This is um, like most likely the side that they're going to be on. So just looking at the source and also making sure we're putting things into context and actually like trying to be like historians and looking at it from a historical perspective instead of like from the perspective of a student where, oh, I'm just reading this just to get the reading done. Like, no, you're reading this to gain a perspective or understand a perspective, not just so you could like answer questions on a worksheet.
Um, have you seen any of these practices implemented in your placement? Please describe and evaluate them.
Yeah. In my placement, we've used like a little bit of like document based questions. Uh, so basically, they'll get like a short paragraph, and then they'll have like two or three questions about it, and like documents are all different perspectives from each side. But I feel like sometimes like the questions don't always lend themselves to like the conclusion you're trying to draw. Like as as a teacher, it kind of bothered me. Like I saw one about how it was about like the annexation of like Texas or something like that, and document was a like a response about why we shouldn't go to war like with Mexico over Texas, and the question was like, could you please like provide some sort of evidence and for why, and then they said like in the document it said that it would be like a pointless waste of life, blah 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 blah, but like the students like weren't able to see like through some of that political like jargon to like catch the drift. Like the main idea is that like they didn't want them going to war in Texas because if Texas joined as a state, then like they would own slaves, and then being a slave state would like upset the balance between like slave states, non-slave states in the Senate and like in the government or whatever. So like the questions in the document, like obviously that's the conclusion I want them to draw. So um, I feel like sometimes the questions, I don't know if that's the goal of my teacher or not, but that's what I would have wanted my students to see.
Mhm.
So like when you're using those documents, you have to make sure the questions with the documents like really actually challenge the students to look past like the direct quote and look at like the meaning of the quote. Like obviously I like it's hard for like middle schoolers to understand or like look through like political messages and see like the subliminal messaging, even in like current like politics. Like obviously it's super confusing, and politicians have like mastered the art of like saying a lot without saying anything really. So uh for this practice to be like effective, like you really have to like focus on giving the students these like analytical skills of these documents. You can't just give them like the questions and say look for the evidence. Like you have to say like look at the person saying the message, like what is their ultimate goal, and you have to provide them with documents that make them look past the document. So
Right.
that's kind of my stance.
All right. So talking about like political stuff, tell me about fake news. What is it? Was the idea invented recently?
No, it was not invented recently. uh Ben Franklin's been doing it since the inception of the United States. He's like making up lies about how like some like I think it was like Native Americans like killed this one important guy or whatever. So people have been like manipulating the news for a while, and I think fake news is um, it's not necessarily like completely fake news. It's just mm, actually yeah, it's kind of like manipulating the message. Actually, I don't know why I'm overcomplicating this. It's just like news that isn't real, and it's like and it has like some sort of like political angle to it. Uh, like we saw with the story of like Hillary Clinton was like owned like a pizza place with like students like being like kept in the basement as hostages or something like that. Some dude like thought that was a real, yeah, I mean it was a real article, but the content wasn't real, and he like showed up to the pizza place with a gun and was gonna do some menacing things. But yeah, no, people have been doing that for a while.
You think it's important to cover with middle school students?
Yes, I do, and I feel like I would try to not use such inflammatory language like fake news. Like that term has been like completely sensationalized, and already like when you bring it up has a political spin to it. So like I would say I would like start saying like pretty neutral things like how accurate do you think this source is the information in this source accurate? um how would you know? Like I wouldn't even bring up fake news. I would just say like, oh, we're doing it like a unit on evaluating sources. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying we're doing a
Fact
unit on
versus
fake news.
opinion type thing.
Could you say that again?
Like fact versus opinion type thing.
Yeah, yeah. I could just fact versus opinion, just anything except for fake news. Because like if you tell students that we're learning about fake news, they'll tell their parents, and they're like, "Well, you're teaching them fake news or something." It'll just get misconstrued, and it's just really, uh, really a soft spot for the American public now, just because of everything that happened with the 2016 election. So I'd go about it in like a sneaky, indirect way. Uh, just to get students to kind of realize, oh, this is how you evaluate a source without
Right.
putting like a spin on it.
How would you help students consider the role of bias?
Uh, well, you got to start kind of by like acknowledging like their implicit biases first, making sure like I like define that term for them and that they understand what it means like for them, since implicit bias is different for everyone because it's implicit. Uh, so kind of just like doing like a deep dive within themselves first to like help them realize, oh, this is the perspective I have. This is kind of how I gained this perspective. This is like why it makes me look at things this way. And then I'd start like looking at sources.
All right. So moving on to the third question. What is the difference between disciplinary literacy and content literacy? And can you provide some specific examples?
Uh, The way I kind of like to think about it is that content literacy is kind of what you do at like the start of a unit, and then disciplinary literacy is like the summative project at the end. Like content literacy is like uh, learning to like, or it's reading to like absorb information, and then it and disciplinary literacy would be reading to use information. Uh, and like an example that would be like, let's say we're learning about the like Civil War, then we're gonna like start reading about like the battles and such, and like the different generals, and then I'm gonna like have the students say like take a look at like the connections between all the generals, and have them like research like how it affected like all the battles, because like all the generals like all graduated from like West Point basically, and they all kind of knew each other and kind of like knew each other's styles. So like I would have them read like about the different generals and the different uh their different like tactics, and then have them draw a conclusion about like why the war played out that way, or like why this battle played out this way.
All right. How would you create a classroom that allows students to feel like insiders?
um I I think insider like outsider status is kind of based on like the information available to people, and like membership status obviously is like granted like based on like if you know or like have felt like what the insider's going through. So I really think that the way to create a classroom that allows students to feel like insiders is make sure we have like a free flowing like atmosphere of communication and information, like make sure students are able to like share their perspectives, and and to make sure that they feel comfortable sharing their perspectives with me and their classmates, and like I should be like comfortable sharing like some of my perspectives too. Like obviously I don't want to like put a lot of my opinion into conversations, but I want to be able to like steer conversations into a way, into like a direction that allows for students to communicate freely and really understand each other, and like understand where I'm coming from when I ask them to do this sort of project or something like that. So yeah, I feel like making sure there's just open lines of communications where the students know what to expect of me, I know what to expect of the students, and the students know like what to expect of each other.
In your placement area, how have you seen your placement teacher implement disciplinary literacy in the classroom? And could you provide
Uh,
examples?
yeah, I haven't really seen much to be honest. Um, maybe, um, I mean, they're doing like my example of like the battles and stuff. Like they're doing that for like World War One. I don't know, but it kind of seems like an intro portion. Like I don't know why, but it doesn't seem super in depth. It kind of just looks like they're just doing like just like a research project basically, and basically just doing the lessons for the teacher. Um, but um, I like they have like a slide requirement for a slide where they have to pick one important person that relates to the battle, and it doesn't necessarily like have to be um like the general of that battle. It could be like a soldier that was super important to that battle. It could be like somebody, it could be like the Wright brothers, like the Wright brothers invented like the plane, and if like the battle had like a lot of stuff with planes going on. Like they could write about the Wright brothers, which I think is like really cool. And it's like learning to like or reading to like create new information. I feel like that's like was outside of the scope of the original lesson, which is kind of what I think disciplinary literacy is. So I think that aspect of it, like as soon as you start making like connections to like the outside world, I mean, it's not even like an outside world, like a lot of it was like super connected, or like the world is super connected in general. So as soon as you like stop seeing um like social studies as just social studies and you start like connecting it to different things, like that is disciplinary literacy, and that's what that like slide is, I think.
Mhm. So the last questions, what are some strategies or techniques of sheltered instruction that you have seen implemented in your school or want to see implemented?
In my school, what I've seen is um basically it's a lot of the teacher um just giving the students extra time and like simplifying his language, because I feel like a lot of the students in the class uh, like aren't at grade level for like reading comprehension, and uh, and because like my teacher kind of just like teaches from the textbook, he like even though that's probably not super optimal in terms of like best practices, he still gets a lot out of the students because he doesn't rush them. So like the students that struggle will still get enough time to get all of their readings done. And I think that's one way he does like sheltered instruction.
How can educators help students acquire English proficiency across the disciplines at a level that suits the students?
Um, I think a lot of that tracks back to what I was saying about like insiders and outsiders, making sure there's open lines of communications, like especially since communication is so difficult for like students that struggle with English. Um, I think like one strategy that you could use is like having an English language like proficient student help out like the non-English language proficient student, because that way the the English language learner still feels like he's a part of the class and participating in like class activities. So he feels like an insider that way. And the English language learner, or the kid that's proficient in English language, like still gets a lot of benefits just because like teaching or like explaining like a concept to somebody is just a really good way of learning it for yourself as well. So that is one way that you could do that. Obviously, you're gonna need to like find the right mix of like student, like you're gonna need to find like a patient, proficient English language kid, and like middle school's like kind of explosive sometimes. So you you really need to know your class to kind of like use that strategy.
Mhm. Um, what are some strategies that a social studies teacher could implement in a classroom that may correlate with a sheltered instruction curriculum?
I think another strategy you could use is like using a lot of picture books. Uh, like picture books aren't always like super simple and like not a grade level. Like they're actually pretty dense texts, like because they're typically like 32 pages long or whatever the average number is, and they still like manage to get a lot across, which is um, and they get a lot of it done with their pictures, which English language learners can interpret, like no matter the level of their English language. Uh, so that is like one way you could do it, especially like in social studies where a lot of your units are like centered around like big conflicts like World War One, World War Two, the Civil War. Like there's like plenty of like picture books about all of those, and you can literally just attack a whole unit with a bunch of picture books, and that's like one way you could do it.
Right. Like you slightly answered the next one, but could you give another
Yeah,
way how visuals play a role while teaching an English learner in a content area?
yeah. Well, they're just another way. They're just a way to compensate for their like lack of proficiency in English, and it's a nice little scaffold to like prop that up because uh like you don't need language to like process a visual.
Mhm. All right. Well, those are all the questions. So
All
thanks.
right. Okay. Let's start from the top again. Right. Disciplinary literacy slash close reading. Tell me a bit about your area of concentration. What are some of the tools that are distinctive to that discipline?
So my discipline is literacy, or ELA, and some of the tools that are useful are just like reading strategies in itself. So like using your finger as you read, or like a ruler or something, just so they can stay on track with the line. Um, and just like learning how to annotate and review what you just read is a good way to help um, my disciplinary literacy and close reading in ELA.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Um, have you seen any of these practices implemented in your placement? Please describe and evaluate them.
Yeah, so right now in my like reading placement, she has like tables set up to help them annotate and then summarize what that like direct quote they pulled is, so that they understand what the quote has to do with the actual meaning of the text and not just pulling random quotes from the book.
Nice. Nice. And you think that's a good strategy then?
I think so, because a lot of struggles that students have right now, especially since they haven't been in schools, is organization. So it's hard for them to even get started
Right.
somewhere because they
Right.
don't know what to do yet, really.
Okay. Yeah. Right. For sure. Right. Let's move on to question two then. Tell me a bit about fake news. What is it? Was the idea invented recently?
So fake news is just news that isn't based on facts or like distorted facts. And it hasn't been invented recently. It's used by anyone for like, it could be the government or like you said, like Ben Franklin in the past, just to change people's opinions on things and to sway them towards um, like an understanding that isn't 100% because they just want something to pass like in the government or socially.
Right. Right. Okay. Is it an important topic to cover with middle school students? Why or why not?
I think it is just because of the stigma recently around fake news. So it would be really important for students to understand early on that doing their own research is important, and actually understanding that articles should be based on facts and like research rather than opinion pieces.
What are some ways you would teach middle schoolers about fake news?
I would have them do an assignment on like fact versus opinion and helping them distinguish um, facts versus opinion in like articles or um, like even textbooks themselves.
Okay. Nice. How would you help students consider the role of bias?
First, I would help them like define what bias is and then have them give me some examples of their own biases if they can. Could share some of mine. And then again, have them like pick out opinions and maybe have like background on the author of whatever that article or piece that they're reading is. So then I can understand why the author wrote that text the way they did.
Gotcha. All right. Continuing on the topic of fake news, uh, do you attempt to look at another source if one source seems biased?
Personally, I get a lot of my news from Twitter. So if I do see like a whack headline, then yeah, I'll go and look. But otherwise, if it's like from a reliable source that I consider reliable, like New York Times or something, then no, I won't go and look at other sources, which is probably bad, but honestly, I don't.
No, I think that's valid. Like I would probably like try to read both sources like all the way through. Because they're like even though like articles are biased sometimes, like there's still a lot of like people will still like use statistics in their articles and you can kind of just like align that with like the statistics used in the other articles that you
Right.
see, so you can like check that way. I kind of like doing that. I feel like there's still like even though news could be fake, they could be it could be fake because they're putting a spin on like a certain statistic, and then you could look at a different article and look at the spin they're putting on the statistic or something like that.
Yeah, it's like 50% of Americans do this. And then the other article is like, well, 50% of Americans actually do this.
Yeah, or yeah,
Yeah,
gotcha.
it's like using the same thing.
Yeah. Do you know that 90% of all statistics are 100% bullshit? All right. That's a dumb dad joke. All right. How do you plan on incorporating current events in your classroom?
Well, it's kind of easier for me as an ELA concentration. I could have them like every Friday bring up an article that was published that week and just do an activity that way since it's easier to incorporate literature into my classroom.
Nice, nice. And you could have like the students like rotate their weeks or whatever. So every week one student brings it in.
Right.
Cool, cool. Uh, how can you incorporate current events in your classroom without showing your students your political stance?
I could just pull from different sources on the political spectrum. So just making sure that I get right wing and left wing pieces into my curriculum, not just my political views.
Gotcha, gotcha. That's smart. How could you show the use of biases in news to students?
Um, I think I kind of talked about this earlier, just having
Yeah,
them like research the author either before or after they read the article,
yeah,
understand what their political alignment is, and then have them pick out um, statements or evidence from the text that isn't supported really by other researchers or just picking out opinions in general.
for sure, for sure. All right, moving on. Um, Using what you know about the stages of language development, what aspects of literacy should you be focusing on as a middle school teacher?
So, like in middle school, not all the kids are really proficient, and as we've learned, or as proficient as us, and sometimes it's hard to understand that as teachers. And as we've learned, students do better when they use the language that they were taught at home. So it's important to know that, or and like accept that all languages are valid, all like forms of English are valid, and not grade them really on like standard English, but rather the content and what they're trying to say is more important than like if the comma was in the right place.
Right. Yeah. Okay. You are a middle grades teacher, and most of your students should fall under the formal operational stage. Many of your students are ELL. They might not be at the same stage as others. How can you, as a teacher, help students with their language development while also aiding the development of other students?
Well, thankfully, we're in the time of technology, and there are many websites. I think I forgot the name of it, but there's a site where you can give students the same exact article, but it'll change like the lexical lexile.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
based on like their quiz. So I could have them do an assignment with the same article, but with reading that matches their comprehension levels.
yeah. Was that we talked about in 410, right? It was like
It's like
Nutella or like Zutella or something like
Newsella, Newsella, that's what it is.
Nutella. Yeah, there you go. Nutella.
Yeah. So that would be really, really helpful for me as an ELA teacher.
Right. As a middle school teacher, how would you grade works from students with grammatical errors?
Um, I would it depends on the assignment. So if it's an assignment about grammar, then I would have to correct it because it would be important for higher ed for them to know how to grammatically write in standard English. But otherwise, if it's just a like an in-class assignment or a homework assignment, then I would rather look at what they're trying to say versus how they're saying it.
Yeah, so like the summative stuff, you'll say, like, look, I know I've been lenient all year, but you're gonna have to step up our grammar game.
Right, or even like giving them a choice on assignments, like, okay, so this one you can write how you want to write, but the next one has to be standard English.
Okay. I like that compromise. All right. That's that's all we got.
All right. It was good interviewing with you, George.
Yeah, good interviewing with you too, Fiona.
Okay. See you in class.
See you in class.